Kramer, Harvard MBA, 1958, married to Wanda, father of two sons, biologically, but father of many sons and daughters, including myself and many of the people who are here. I can go on and on about Dick, but it's my pleasure to invite him this morning to share with us his thoughts on the subject. A round of applause for him.
Forward and back. And how do you get it to move over?
That we have to figure
Huh? Come on, you guys, technology. Okay. Let's try it just to see what happens. Yeah, it does, huh? You know, this slide reminds me of my granddaughter when I first had cell phones. I couldn't get them to work. And she picked it up and fixed it what was needed. And she said, "Oh, Granddad, don't you know anything?" And the truth is that my generation doesn't pick up things near as fast as this generation, the class today that we celebrated. And as a matter of fact, before I even start my speech, I was at a group of apostles, must have been apostles, because there's 12 of them last night for dinner. And we were trying to get the kinds of organizations we'd had before that helped in things like visioning and setting up the summit and things of this nature to regroup with the idea to support this government. And particularly, I'd say 6 or 8 core players, including Okianelama is one of them, but certainly the Vice President, who many of you will see tonight, and certainly Senator Udo Doma, etc. And we looked around the group, and there was only one woman, and that was Shola David Bora. I don't know whether you know her from Stanbic IBTC, but we all agreed that one woman in Nigeria really doing the work can take care of 11 men. Now, you girls believe that, and we got a better balance on this side of the aisle, so I'm pleased with that. And one of the other conclusions we had was, you know, we're all 45 or 50 or older. What we need to do is to work on the people that are 20 to 30. And I understand this group that we had today was from 25 to 35. Is that right? Any of you outliers? Some of you younger, some of you older? But my guess, the conclusion out of last night was that each of the 12 of us need to go work in the institutions and groups that we're in. You'd be amazed how diverse it was to get mobilization to help this government at this point in time, because the signs are good. But above all, we need to get some young people, and we particularly need to get a lot of women involved in this. And I guess the challenge I'm throwing out to apostles in the marketplace, John, is how do we link up with these old men? There's guys like Chris that don't want to be called elder, so I'll just say the older experienced men and women, to get the younger people behind the change that it takes in this country to get it to really realize its potential. Now, I'm going to talk about things today that I've already said to apostles in the marketplace. You had a book, John, called Nation Builder. I noticed there was 2 of my presentations in it, and one of them that will be a lot more ample than what I'll cover today actually tells the story probably better than I will today, because as I get older I find out I get tired, and back then I had lots of energy in me, etc., and I suspect that you go back to this book and you'll find more things in it that are important to nation building than I'll even be able to get across to you today. But nonetheless, I'll try. Because when Apostles in the Marketplace started, you had, John and Prof, you had this idea that religion wasn't enough. If you don't do things in your work in your profession, in whatever you're doing to help a family, a community, your neighbors, the schools that you send your children to, churches, etc., and then out from that into business and into government and all the social institutions you have in the country, you're not really practicing your religion. We must call that walking the talk. And so the apostles in the marketplace, I think, took that path. And I think you followed it fairly consistently. And I'll give you some ideas as to how to do it, because I've had the blessing to work in a number of institutions here in the country where they started very, very small and they succeeded. And I'll refer to a few of them. But I wasn't kidding when I had Tulu and his father up here sort of thing. And, you know, I started with one Nigerian in 1978, a firm that now is KPMG, and is, I think, over 1,000 people. A firm that's Accenture, which I think is over 200 people, and there's close to 2,000 alumni of that organization that got started with one person, a fellow named Ladi Jadasimi, if any of you know or remember the name, etc. But let me not stray too much from the speech so that I don't waste everybody's time. The purpose today is to focus on the challenges that are facing Nigeria and to share some career experience I've had in institution building, which I think will help us define some of the keys to building for the future. And then maybe I can challenge all of you to build a great Nigeria, because this is a country that has the potential with no limitation to be one of the great countries of the world. But it has to step up to the challenges. The challenges are pretty well known to most of us. There's been a lot of successes. I would take, Chris, successes like Lagos Business School turning into Pan Atlantic University, Muson, telecoms were mentioned earlier. I can remember when I got my first telephone here, it was wonderful, because for about 6 months I had to go to Nitel and pay money. And sure enough, every time I'd get on the phone with somebody that knew me, they'd say, "Oh, Dick, how are you? How's things in Nigeria?" And, you know, they'd want to visit. And I only had 10 minutes I paid for, and I was trying to get a certain call through, etc. And boy, you can bet at the end of 10 minutes, I was shut off and had to go back to the end of the line to make the call. So it's great to even have a phone, even if it didn't work most of the time. And telecoms has gone from 300,000 or 400,000 phones to what, 100? The resources of this country are so good that this ought to be one of the top dozen countries in the world, without any question. You could take any good Nigerian out of this system, put him in another system that really is working, and he or she will excel. And I saw this all the time, particularly as we started sending more and more students to the United States, where I got to know more what was happening, how many Nigerians succeed in the U.S. As I understand it, there's over 25,000 doctors, nurses, and medical people in the United States. I happen to live in a small town, and believe it or not, we have a Nigerian doctor. We also have a Syrian doctor. So, I mean, you know, it's a country of people that leave for one reason or another, get their education, etc., and thrive. There's no reason why Nigerians can't build one of the great countries of the world. But the curse has been oil, an over-dependence on oil, a misuse of the proceeds. creation of a culture of excessive self-interest and corruption. And nobody has to be corrupted. You do it only because you choose the easy way. Those of you that are graduates now should be the examples of those that stand up against doing the wrong things, and you know they'll be wrong if it's just money you're after sort of thing, and stand for principles. Now, the democratic processes have been somewhat interrupted in Nigeria. You started off as a democracy. The whole military period of time has taught you a lot of bad habits. And I think many of those bad habits are still ones that you're trying to overcome. Because even coming to a democracy once more in the late 90s with a military leader who claims to be a Democrat today, but he's a military leader. And the way that the military destroyed what was a strong civil service at independence are all heritage that we have today that we're having to overcome. And so one of the big weaknesses in the country is that you, despite being a colony of one of the leading countries in the world, who at least passed to you a governance system, some education system, some health care, a lot of industry, although it was designed to favor the home country. You had a lot of advantages at independence. And I'd say primarily the military helped you destroy that. And it couldn't help but think, as you went through your national anthem and your pledge, as we have a Pledge of Allegiance in the United States, that those basic things of one nation and working together and all the things that are stated in that are the things that you still have to work on today. Because in our democratic process today, there's no question that ethnicity, religion, power, and not the power like we have here, the power, are the things that are holding Nigeria back from being one great nation. So much of what we're going to talk about today are facing these challenges. Did I lose this? I got used to NEPA. I thought we were better off now. Okay. No, it's the problem is the driver of this vehicle. It's not the vehicle. My message to you today is, with all these challenges, it's time to face the music. And it's time to take a very positive role in nation building. And one of the best things that has happened to us recently is we've let our oil production go downhill for lots of reasons I could explain. And the low oil prices, which look like they're going to be protracted for a period of time, mean that we will face the music. We may not develop a better song than we've been doing in the past, but we are going to have to change the way that we work. And what we need in this country is a long-term game plan, not short-term fixes. And you can tell in the nation today there's a lot of, how do we get this solved quickly? Almost all the economic solutions and probably almost all the political and social solutions that you need in this country take years of hard work to get them done. There probably are no quick fixes. And you can tell already there's a lot of anxiety building up in the country, despite some good things that have happened since this new administration. And so my word to you is, you have to have the willpower to build for the long term. Where there is a will, there is a way. And continuing with challenges. I think the few success stories I told you at the beginning could be repeated, but there is a lot of good things that happen in Nigeria. And when you get right-minded people working together for the right long-term purpose with the right way of doing things, it succeeds in Nigeria just like it does any place in the world. And you can actually learn from other countries and other institutions and other examples and bring those ideas back here. But you have to bring them back and make them work within this system. You don't take plants from someplace else, one that grows in northern Canada, and bring it here and it works as well as you'd like to, sort of thing. So you've got to learn from the world, learn from good experience, and bring it here and make it work. And actually, this government, I think, presents a good opportunity for significant change. There are a core of ministers that we know, including the VP, who I think many of you will hear from tonight, that represent a group of people aligned with the right kind of long-term purpose and the right kind of methods to get there, that if we can back and work with them, I think we can do some good. So my message to you, whoever you are, wherever you are in this nation, is the time to act is now. I'll tell you a little bit about career. I was interested in what Shagan was telling you earlier about all the wonderful things that John D. Rockefeller and everybody else did in the United States. I was born in the Great Recession in the United States, in a settler community in southwest Kansas, which was a dust bowl. It had had drought, and it was just a terrible place. And my mother and father got engaged in building anything at the local community level that was needed, whether it was church, schools, Boy Scouts, anything that we had 4 sons, so it was pretty much whatever the sons needed sort of thing. But also my mother taught in Girl Scouts and taught in school and things. My father was a lawyer. And they really helped build that community. And at that point in time, everybody tightened their belt the same. And you never felt like somebody was rich or not so rich, etc. And I must tell you, growing up, the biggest joke we had is to have somebody show up in a nice tie and, says, "I'm from Washington, D.C., and I'm here to help you." And it wasn't we had bad government in Washington, D.C. It's just that if you didn't do the things at home in your community to get things done, it wouldn't get done. And in fact, one of the great strengths of the United States is that there are school systems, there are all kinds of infrastructure type systems, there are city governments and township governments and county governments and state governments that work. So it's not what happens at the federal level. And a lesson I think needs to be learned in Nigeria. You start at home. You start in your neighborhood. My mother used to teach, when you point your finger at the neighbor, remember 4 fingers are pointing back at you. And the story was, clean your own doorstep before you go talk to the neighbor. Now this is why I think I've grown up with the approach that anybody here that talks about the problems are in Abuja, the problems are these bad people in government, the problems, I said, wait a minute. Have you cleaned your own doorstep? Have you taken care of what you can do? Because I have a strong belief that if you do your job and your neighbor does a job and all in your community do their job. Chris, isn't the saying at Lagos Business School in Pan Atlantic, oasis of sanity? And the idea of it is, if each one of us will create an oasis, and then we'll meet like-minded people who think like we do, that oasis will get bigger. And at some time, that oasis becomes a lake or a sea or an ocean. You think of that a little bit, and you apply that to Nigeria. Someday Nigeria can be a great country. That a more affluent society as we have today gets very naturally. We had to do it ourselves. We had victory gardens, things of this nature. Now my sons grew up also overseas pretty much, because we had moved to first to Kuwait and then to Argentina and then to Brussels and this sort of thing, and they graduated in Argentina and went back to school, etc. But every summer they worked on the family farm, and they worked for experienced people who knew their job and taught them how to work. So even to today, and the two boys are roughly 60, they have those same values we do. Now I can tell in the grandchildren that they grew up with a little bit more wealth and things of this nature, and I wonder if they have all these same values, but I'm very proud of them. So what I'm trying to get through in this is, it isn't money. It's what you do with your life. It's how you have a good family, how you have a good career, how you build a good community or any other institution that you're in, and how you help build a great country. I don't know why they thought I was out of water, but it's a very good idea. I started with the firm of Arthur Anderson, and I already told you what happened to it here, but it was about the 15th or 20th largest firm in the world when I started with it. And it was an extremely dedicated group of people who hired the best, trained the best, worked the hardest, and didn't do anything at all that lacked integrity. I cannot say the same for it when it ended up. I can tell you that story in detail. But what it believed in was to hire the best people, give them the best skills, any place in the world. I can give you an example. I wasn't the first one to start up our firm in Buenos Aires. I think I was about the 35th one, and then I was helping set up consulting in Latin America. And became office managing partner, and later on country managing partner. We were 35 people when I started. PricewaterhouseCoopers, some of you know the accounting profession, this was a combination of the two, was 400. Almost all of them were Anglo-Argentines. Our fellows were Italian. No, they were Italian 2 generations into Nigeria. They were immigrants into Argentina. When I left, we were probably 200 people. It grew to 1,300, 1,400 people. And that same story happened all through the world, because we hired local people, we trained them, and we got out of their way when they were ready. And any of you that worked in Anderson know that that worked here in Nigeria. Now, I got derailed for some reasons. We're primarily chasing money. When the consulting practice and the audit practice split, I think they split over money, and they got away from basic principles. Now, there wasn't a full demise of the audit and tax practice, despite some very poor work that was done in one of our major offices in the U.S., because almost every one of those firms ended up being in another major firm, and mostly they dominated those firms. But Anderson Consulting, which I was a part of, and I guess Segun Olajobi can tell you more story than I can, turned into Accenture and has done a tremendous job. So what I'm after in telling you this story is that professional firms, just like industry, professional firms that do the job right can excel, and they do not have to lose integrity. Continuing with experience, maybe. Now, I think neighbors come back to haunt me. Is it possible? What do I do? What button do I hit? Any of them? Yeah. Well, that puts it back. Okay. You're taller than my granddaughter. She's just a little girl. Like that. I already told you some of this, so don't let me bore you. But I've been all over the world. I couldn't hold a job, you know. And I found every place that if you get good people, do the right thing, right practices, long enough, it works. It works in all the continents, and probably it's Africa that is the one that's going to be the real success story in the rest of our lifetimes. There's a book by Charles Ellis that I can give you reference on if you want to ever have any story about Anderson and why it capsized. The point I want to get across in this is everywhere I went, everywhere I found communities and nation builders, particularly in professions and businesses, in education and healthcare, in religions, charities, NGOs, and bear in mind these religions were well beyond Christianity. This is a Christian group, but you also have to be able to walk the talk with other religions. And they can do just as much, just as powerful a nation builder as you can be. You shouldn't also ignore the international agencies and players that are willing to help. There's a lot of very dedicated people in some of those institutions that we always blame for our failures rather than fessing up that we're the cause of the problem, etc. And I say sometimes in government. I think there are not all that many governments around the world that are the role model for Nigeria. And so we may have to invent our own way of being successful. Let me on this next slide just tell you a little bit about the success stories like Lagos Business School and Pan Atlantic University. Most people don't realize that well-intended people working in the right way have built a lot of very good organizations. I would consider the Summit, the American Business Council, this group, Apostles in the Marketplace. Any of you that know people from Harvard Business School Association in Nigeria? African Capital Alliance, who I think has been one of your main supporters. The whole Vision 2010 process. Many of the things that many of you in this room have worked on have been success stories. The trouble is there has not been enough of it to reach a critical mass so that you got what would be an atomic explosion. And it's really the challenge to this young group of graduates to work with the older people on this side of the room to start to make that happen. Now, I'd say the keys to this is to have a very successful mission, and we need it as a country. You have it in the Apostles. Set out long-term objectives that link to the strategy of how you're going to get there. Be sure that the action and the given their particular position and situation and concentrate on them. And this is what we did in China. It's also what we did in Taiwan. And they're two amazing examples in the last 30, 40, 50 years, etc. I'd suggest you get that book and maybe many of you read it, and particularly give it to all your young students, because it teaches something different than what has been the conventional wisdom since World War II. If you got to do it like we do it in the United States, or you got to do it like we do it in Europe. No, you got to pick what works for you. Singapore was an example. Malaysia's been an example, although they seem to have lost the track. Indonesia, Brazil. But look at this Taiwan Chinese thing and then adapt it to Nigeria, sort of thing. So a lot of the where do we want to be has to do with picking what Nigeria could be great at and working on that. But then the fundamental question is, how do we get there? We've already challenged the things that I wanted to put on the next slide. Start with yourself. I think your course has already helped you do that. Start with your family. Start with your neighborhood. Start with your work. Start with the community you live in. Start at these lower levels and you will be building for the nation. All of those levels result in nation building. Now I'll leave you only with a couple thoughts. To me, Nigeria is at a crossroads and it needs strong ethical leadership today. There's huge opportunity in this country for competent, principled leaders to emerge. And what we need is all levels of the economy. A diversified approach that actually helps make this happen. I would suggest that the apostles can be one of the solutions. And I think if you'll adopt the approach of helping at government at all levels, business at all levels, professions of every type, NGOs and community, religion, education, everything that's around your family, your personal life, and build with the idea that whatever my circle of capability is what I'll work in. And I'm not going to point my finger at everybody else and say they're the problem. I'm going to point four fingers back at myself and say, in my circle of competence, I'll make it work. Now, I happen to live in a country where the eagle is the symbol. In fact, on my high school, it was Huguet and Eagles. So the thing I would just leave you with is, I'd like you to soar like eagles.
You didn't need it. So we had to, okay, good.
At this time, we're going to take questions. If anyone would like to ask questions of Dick or Shego, could you just indicate by raising your hand and I'll get the microphone to you.
Let me tell you, you're waiting. Good gosh, these people weren't timid when they came up to get their certificate. What's going on? Valedictorians and salutatorians and whatever don't have any questions? Oh, I'm shaming you. It's terrible. You know?
There's a question.
Okay.
Good afternoon. My question goes this way. Nigerian economy, currency goes from 400 naira to $1, and you're talking about industrialization. You're talking about the 5 men that actually gained power and changed the game of America. How can Nigeria actually create our 5? You said different things work in different continents, and can 5 people really sit down and look at Nigeria 2030? How would Nigeria's real estate or how would Nigeria's telecommunication actually be? How can we design indigenous technology that suits us and we sell it to the outside world? It's all these kind of things that really can make the Naira command respect internationally.
Let me ask you a question. Suppose you wanted to be an Olympic athlete. How would you train?
Every day, by 5 a.m. in the morning, I leave my house. I get to the gym constantly.
And you get it done next week. No, when do you start to be a great athlete?
As early as possible.
As early as possible, and you keep working at it, and you pick up the habits and the discipline, and of course the skills. What are the things that Nigeria could be great at? You can certainly be good at sports because you are. You look at any professional football team in the United States and count the Nigerians. You look at basketball players. Who's Hakeem Olajuwon? Was he a Greek or, you know? You've got talent that can work in a number of areas. The entertainment area, certainly in sports, in any kinds of physical activities. Now, just how bad is the climate here? Is it terrible? Good gosh, I mean, you know, I've lived in climates where, you know, you didn't even get sun part of the year. And it was cold, and you froze. You're blessed with a climate, aren't you? And how good is your land? It's good, isn't it? It's very good. Despite the fact you've let a little bit of degradation come from the north because you didn't take care. And so there's been encroachment, hasn't it? But that could be reversed. And you know, they tell me we're getting some palm oil plants from Malaysia to grow in Cross River State. Do you know where those plants came from? They came from Nigeria to Asia, and now they're coming back because those people are probably at a little higher living standard sort of thing, and they need to get cheaper labor. Wouldn't agribusiness be where you'd work? Now, I grant you that agribusiness is different today than it was when you had independence. I talked about working on the farm. Back at that time, there might have been 5 or 6% of the U.S. population working on the farm. You know, it's less than 2% today. And we have surpluses of food. So, agribusiness is going to be different than you thought about it before, or it won't be competitive. You're going to have to be more mechanized, more technology-driven, more science, etc., etc. But it's a source of work. That would be one of your competitive advantages, wouldn't it? Okay. Tell me, do you have any minerals? Oh, you do. Who exploits them and sells them? Do you know they're actually sold, but they go across the border and they don't even show up in your statistics? Well, at least you have some minerals that you can do something about. I understood you had some natural gas. Do you? I have heard Nigeria described as a natural gas field that happens to have a little bit of oil. What could you build on natural gas? There isn't hardly any kind of chemical or, you know, let's move to some other countries and find out where the real disadvantages are. You know what I mean? Now, I already told you that you take Nigerians out of this system and put them someplace else, they thrive, don't they? Oh, so it isn't a matter of brain power or hard work or things of that nature, is it? This is not a lazy country. And I say that with some experience. When I started, we started in all the Francophone countries as well. And let me tell you this, in the other Francophone countries I was in, they didn't want a job, they wanted a position. I came to Nigeria and I found out people were willing to work. You know the difference? So, wait a minute, we've covered natural resources, we've covered people, we've covered climate. What about location? Oh my God, does it get cold here? It's terrible. Freeze, you know, in the winter I freeze. Yes. It's terrible, isn't it? You don't even have earthquakes. You don't have monsoons. You don't have any hurricanes. Well, every once in a while the wind gets up a little bit, but never did knock the roof off of any building I've been in. And Chief Kolowofoyeku almost lost the roof of his house, I can tell you, but because we were pretty close to the Atlantic. Tell me what the disadvantage is in Nigeria. Now, it's true that you don't want to try to compete with Switzerland. You want to build on the resources you have now and the skills and things of this nature and build from them and someday compete with anybody else in the world. You with me? And one of the things that's actually favored us in being a country that hasn't developed so well is our cost of labor actually can be low enough that we can compete with other countries that are labor intensive and bring those jobs here. We are a country that can develop all kinds of raw materials, but we also can process them and export them. So even industrialization. And how do you like the road system here? How do you like the rail system? How do you like the ports? Huh? But we can't build roads here, right? We couldn't have a rail system that worked, right? You couldn't have a decent port here, huh? They can have one in Abidjan, but we can't have it. Wait a minute. When you go criticizing your neighbor, how many fingers pointing back at yourself? Okay, I just thought I'd let that be a lesson from my mother.